In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Well, hello, Sublation Magazine readers, Sublation Media viewers, comrades, heretics, and deplorables. It is I, Douglas Lain. I'm by myself today. Ashley Frawley is in Belgium, giving some sort of educational talk and participating in a panel. What we did was we recorded our conversation yesterday, and in just a moment, I'll be uh, running that recording. I have it right here, already all loaded up to show you. I should say, if you like Sublation Magazine, if you like Sublation Media, if you enjoy watching our videos, listening to the podcasts, or telepathically communicating with us in the middle of the night, you should click on the subscribe button. You should support us on Patreon. You should tell your friends and neighbors about us. We are the last and best hope for the American left. All right. So I have two things that I'm going to do here in this stream. If you're out there watching and you haven't clicked away because Ashley's not here, what I would say we should do is this. Actually, I think before I run the conversation with Ashley, in the notes for this stream, I said that I would respond, or that we would respond, but we're not both going to Benedict Cryptofash's article in his Substack criticizing Sublation. And so I'm going to read that to you, unless somebody in the comments says that they don't want to hear it. So here it is. I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. It's called Sublation, the Leftist Dissident Magazine. And Benedict says, Sublation is the outlier in this series. He was writing a series of articles critiquing dissident magazines, mostly of the right. So we're the outlier because, unlike the other publications we've been examining, its dissonance comes explicitly from the left. Headed by leftist media veteran Douglas Lain, Sublation does not emerge as some disruptive new force, but rather as a continuation of the existing left media, which senses its need to appear critical of itself to stay relevant. Indeed, its critique of the left from the left is in many ways a response to a situation in which the left has become synonymous with the establishment and all the dissident energy is going to the right. Well, if that's the case, I just want to say that I've been critiquing the left from the left since like 2017 and before. So while Sublation is in a different orbit than the dissident right publications with which we have been occupied, it provides an example of how the left is attempting to recapture some of its dissonance for itself. In its inability to generate the same buzz as the dissident right media demonstrates, however, that at this juncture, such an effort is dead on arrival. Well, a magazine like Compact has has deeper pockets funding it than we do on the left. So I think the lack of buzz may have something to do with the lack of marketing budget. This is because at this late date, after the discrepancy between its branding and its reality has become impossible to ignore, the left has such a weak dissonant hand to play that any critique it produces of itself will be unconvincing. Unable to distinguish itself in any plausible way from the dominant progressive liberalism, the left has ceded its anti-establishment ground to the dissident right, which it is largely responsible for creating. In the absence of any compelling leftist dissidents, the right has gained a monopoly on the anti-establishment posture historically claimed by the left. After all, much of the energy that has surged through the dissident right has come from an influx of disillusioned leftists out for vengeance against the socialists whose anti-establishment pretenses they once believed in, but which now have become nothing but a joke. It is fitting to conclude this series with Sublation, therefore, because its flaccid, left-wing dissidence illustrates how leftism has become the ideological atmosphere of polite society and it's coincided with the downfall of the left's credibility as a subversive force. Despite the myriad delusions and contradictions coursing through the publications of the dissident right, the half-hearted and uninspiring leftist dissonance on offer by post-Jacobin outlets like Sublation make it clear that the right has a better dissonant story to sell than the left, which in the wake of its recent history, Trump derangement, Black Lives Matter, Biden-Harris, COVID-19, etc., has none to sell at all. Sublation nevertheless makes the effort, drawing from the dissonant well of crisis and failure, in a mission statement that begins with references to our time of crisis. I'm going to skip ahead. The dissident right may be a farcical echo of utopian leftism, but it has seized the anti-establishment opportunity the left has granted it, capturing the audience of disaffected liberals looking for oppositional alternatives to a pervasive and stifling atmosphere of progressive liberalism. Demonized by Democrats, it can plausibly present itself to these types as something else, whereas the left is helpless to regain its dissonant edge because the left is this very progressive liberalism. It's unable to criticize itself totally and not partially because in doing so, it would cease to be the left. Sublation seeks to overcome the left's exhausted projects with something else that is nevertheless still the left. Yet this doomed sublation represents, in fact, the exhaustion of leftist dissonance, of subversiveness that has emptied itself in the ideological ascendance of leftism, the precondition of the dissident right, and the golden age of its magazines. So that's the article from Benedict Cryptofash with quite a bit excised, but it really is just, there's a bit about how, about the crisis that we're facing and that I might return to if people want to hear that, but it really, that's a pretty good summary of what he wrote. And what I would say is that it is in many ways a true critique. I mean, it's not completely missing the boat here. To a large extent, the left, especially as defined by if you define it as a social democratic left, or the left that was energized from 2016 onwards, congregated around the Bernie Sanders campaign in the United States, that left that had hopes of taking some form of political power has been completely absorbed by the progressive left wing of capital. I was always standing a little bit askance from that left, trying to be part of a united front with it, critical but supportive. I don't know how well I did at avoiding getting absorbed. But lately, especially, I am more committed to striking out on an independent path from all aspects of the so-called progressive left. It's maybe progressive in the sense that it can be traced back to the progressive movement, but I don't believe that there's anything left-wing about it. So I think reclaiming the idea of the left, the libertarian spirit of the left. I know that word has been tainted by libertarians of a capitalist stripe, but the questing after freedom, both for individuals and society, is something that we should hold on to, and maintaining criticism and a critical stance, and even taking up critical theory as a Marxist tradition is something, it's really the only hope. I mean, if I wanted to be defanged by the Republican Party and go to the right, I would, I might have some momentary ability to appear edgy, or dissident, but there would be no chance of any far-reaching change or even understanding, just merely in thought, from that move. So there's no reason to embrace any kind of conservative or right-wing dissidence, but rather the only hope is to break free of the progressive wing of capitalism and try to develop and reimagine the radical left. So yeah, some people are saying. Someone says, I disagree with his insistence on you and Sublation being toothless. Like the example he gave, you guys were all on a distant side of it, even if it put you at odds within your peer group. That's what he's saying there. And someone else says, once being in the left stops being fun, it becomes work, people leave. Well, especially if they're just doing it on a volunteer basis, not remunerated at all. I would say that word wrong. So let's see some other comments here. So that part you read also had a time horizon of less than a decade. That cycle has played out more than once already. I think that's probably true. And someone else says, is there anything valuable or substantial at the base of this critique specifically? And I'm going to say no, but it's someone who at least took the time to make a critique of our project. So I appreciate that. And this Benedict Cryptofash fellow for a while seemed like he was some sort of blazing light on Twitter, getting a lot of people angry. But what happened there is he shifted from going after the progressive so-called left to going after conservatives, and his audience didn't really care for that because I think most of them had become conservative. I'm not sure, but the he's part of what I would call the critical. He wouldn't like this, but the critical left, the Marxist, an attempt to take up Marxism, or at least he's aligned with people who want to reimagine Marxism. Like Elena, what was her name again? I had her on my podcast a while ago. She recently tweeted at me too, so I could probably find her tweet. But anyway, there are people on the Marxist left who've been very critical of progressivism and the democratic or the social democratic turn that he was sort of aligned with, but they've all sort of become post-leftists in one way or another, which I think is a mistake. Someone says here, the left has become a reactionary force from wokeism to degrowth to the current red-brown alliance. It's hard to find a large home anywhere, just small pockets. Yeah. Someone says here, class must be put back on the agenda to cut through the damaging and divisive focus on identities pushed by the woke left. Yeah, I think not just like taking up class politics as a kind of identity politics where we are always concerned about the way in which working people are oppressed, but rather taking up class as the social relationship that structures society and that has to be overcome if we're going to be able to create conditions of freedom and equality and justice for all. Someone says, I do think he has a valid component to his critique, being that the problem we face on the broad left is the tendency for progressive forces to rebrand establishment forces in politics as progressive. Yeah. So what I would say is that what happens is that, especially during the Trump years, but probably overall, is that the radical left energy is taken up as an anti-right or anti-fascist energy, which then can be easily turned into a pro-Democratic Party energy, and easily manipulated. So, like, the enemy of my enemies becomes my friend, especially when that enemy of my enemy is the only political force that seems to be available to combat my enemies. So, which is why a lot of people, when they get sick of the progressive Democrats, will go to the right, will become conservative Republicans, because at least those people are actually doing political work and have some vestiges of power. So someone says, I've yet to find post-left commentator that has anything substantial to say. It's all the same tired vibes-based, zero research, cultural commentary. And yeah, that would be the weakness here of this critique of Sublation. He's talking about how you might as well be in marketing. You know, I might as well like have hired him as a marketing consultant to give me his vibe check on the social media landscape. And the public, you know, the various publications, you know, saying, oh, well, the dissidents brand has moved from the social democratic left to the right. And that's because this brand of left dissidents has, you know, has been tainted or ruined by its association with the establishment brand. Okay, probably, but you know, that if we're going to think beyond the level of, you know, marketing and branding and this reactive kind of chasing after clicks, you know, we have to do better than this. We have to, you know, we have to actually try to hold on to ideas and develop them into a political project in the face of the, you know, varying demographic and, you know, in the face of cultural changes and momentary changes in attention. And someone says, I think Sublation is underrated. YouTube isn't favorable to show this channel versus Hakem second thought people. Yeah. So someone's grabbing their Doug mug. All right, then maybe we should. No, I'm not going to say that. All right, so I have my All Saints Episcopal Church mug, which my ex-wife used to go to the All Saints. All right, so listen, I'm going to run this pre-recorded conversation between Ashley and myself now, and then there's a second recording, and I'll also be answering viewer mail in the Patreon. And here is our conversation.
So, Ashley, you and I are recording this live stream. It's not a live stream anymore. We're recording it a day early. Where are you in real life right now? You're at some conference. You're out creating a red-brown alliance. What are you doing right this minute?
Oh, well, I am about to be traveling to Belgium in the morning. In the afternoon. So I'm gonna miss our live stream because I have gone over to the dark side and of him now with the fascists, even though I always talk about being against fascism and making sure that we know full well what it is and that we don't accidentally say things as Marxists and leftists that fascists say. Anyway, no, so I am going to go do like a public kind of panel talk thing. But generally, I've been doing some reports for the MCC in Brussels, which is funded by the Hungarian government. So if you guys all want to burn me at the stake, go for it. The reason is because, as I've said a million times, the family stuff, nobody on the left is with me. Nobody. I was the only person, I think, one of the only leftists that I'm aware of who stood up against the attempt to ban corporal punishment in the home. And you know who it comes down on most is poor, working class, minority families, immigrant families especially, to come in and use their violence and their power to like make people submit to what are very middle class ideals of parenting and a so-called science of parenting that is really based on studies done of middle class people in the United States that's just then projected to the whole world and is used to problematize families the world over. So now I'm writing some reports for the MCC. I have full freedom to say whatever I want to say. Nobody can make me say something that I don't believe. And in fact, if somebody tried to make me say something I don't believe, that's called bribery. And yeah, so that's what I've been doing. So yeah, so I'm writing a couple of reports, and I think I'm gonna teach some classes, and so that's what I'm gonna be doing over the next couple months.
Okay. I hope you have time to dedicate, yourself mostly full time to Sublation during those months.
Obviously, that's always my very first. That's where my heart is. That's always my first priority. In fact, I just finished filming my 3rd episode of Base AF, which is really, really ridiculous, and it involves my dog and a beard.
I've been discouraged about the behavior of many people on the so-called left. Actually, my son Ben visited me last night, and I was listing the people who I was mad at, and I was like, Sam Cedar, the Majority Report, this guy named the Humanist Report, David Pakman, and he's like, Dad, why are you listening? I mean, none of those people are on the left. What they none of but he's a former head of the Pacific Northwest Communist Party, so he's more of a Leninist probably than I am. But why is it that I could even think for a moment that David Pakman is on the left, or the Humanist Report is on the left, and why? And what is it that I'm championing when I say I want to defend the left? And it seems to me, just to say it like an elevator pitch, what I am trying to hold on to is an anti-authoritarian project for human emancipation aimed at giving everyone in society the opportunity and the ability and even the responsibility to shape the future and to reach their full potential as individuals and then as a society. That's what, for me, the left is about. It's about moving forward. It's about creating change. It's about developing individual and societal freedom. And so that is what the Left Project is, from my perspective. That's very abstract, but I feel like it has to be that abstract in order for us to have a starting place. We can't start with, I'm on the left because I oppose abortion. That wouldn't be the right place to start. The other thing I guess I'll add is that historically, the distinction between left and right was the distinction between those who sided with the king and those who sided for revolution during the French Revolution. So those who stood to the left were of the president were standing for revolution. Those who stood to the right were standing for the continuation of the monarchy. So that's like, do we want revolutionary independent change, or are we going to stand on traditional authority?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I think somebody wrote about me once, like putting words in my mouth, like, Ashley, no, I'm not blah, blah, blah. I'm post-left. I was like, literally never said that in my life. Wouldn't put myself post-left. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I see myself more in the tradition of self-critique, of like socialist self-critique. And I think that's really, really important. So I think that history is important as an anchor, or else you get lost. And I think what's happening now is very similar to what happened, let's say, I don't know, the 20s, the early part of the 20th century. It became very fashionable for people to call themselves socialists, which is amazing now. But at the time, many, many different groups wanted to use the word socialist. So if you think of like someone like, I think it was Oswald Spengler, who was describing his ideas, and he's like, oh, I don't know, call them socialist, whatever. What do words matter? Very kind of fascist thing to say. What do words matter? But people were drawing, they wanted to call themselves socialists. And I think this is the case now, where the leftism is something that a lot of people want to identify with. It's become like a highly sort of moralistic discourse where the right is everything that is evil and the left stands for everything that is good. And so there's an incentive for people of many different backgrounds, political backgrounds or beliefs or lack thereof, to think of themselves as leftists. And I think in that situation, you don't just say, well, if that's a leftist, then I'm not a leftist. I mean, you could say that, but then you wind up in this situation where you can wind up sounding quite a lot like a fascist, right? Saying leftists do this and leftists do that. And I'm usually very careful to put left in quotation marks because what I'm trying to do is rather than abandon the left and project all the evils of the world onto it, I think of like Trotsky, for instance, in the very short piece called What is National Socialism? Where he just mocks National Socialism for its zoological materialism and so on. And it's just very clear that there is a massive difference between National Socialism, Nazism, obviously, and socialism proper. And what scares me is that as soon as somebody calls themselves leftist, we're like, well, they must be on our team. Like, no, not necessarily at all. If you've got like zoological materialism, you are not a leftist. No, that is part of the wrong tradition that called itself socialism. That was the bad guys who did that. And I'm seeing this now, like race realism come back up again, where it's like, I remember there was like a thread on Twitter where it was like, okay, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but like, why can you, okay, I'm like, honest question, why can you be transgendered but not transracial? And the comments underneath were like, because race is biological. I was like, oh my God, we can question gender norms without reifying race. We don't need to like make race biological again. Oh my God, that is so backward. And so and then there was like recently there was questioning around academics. Oh, should we teach the social construction of race anymore? Yes, we should teach the social construction of race. Are you insane? This is what happens. This is crazy because we're unmoored. There's nothing that anchors us. So I think having that anchor and that history of like socialist self-critique is really important to say, like, first of all, these ideas will not work for this particular reason, or this is a surface level understanding. We need to penetrate deeper. This is all important. I'm sure people have critiques of me. I know Spencer's preparing a critique of me for that reason.
No, every time we make any kind of
as much
stream,
as it hurts. What's that?
I said, anytime we put out a stream, Spencer gives us his critique afterwards. Often enough.
And it helps me, actually. I think it's really good. It's quite important. It hurts.
I'm not going to go so far as to say it's really good and it's really important, and I'm not going to say it hurts either. But it happens. But
Down to still my self-respect. I never had any. It's fine. Anyway, so this is what I see myself as doing. I feel like on our side, and I feel like social media is so bad because it encourages a lot of snark, and sometimes you can't see the person that you're talking to. And in my everyday life, I'm not mean to people. Like I'm sure most people are, but particularly young people who are just learning. I kind of like, okay, especially my classes, I just, I don't think everybody has to agree with me. I have it out. I let, they're on a path, they're on a journey. But on freaking social media, you don't really have that opportunity to kind of guide people because they just come at you. The kind of impulse is to just be equally rude. And I feel myself kind of sucked into that. And I just really don't want to do that. So I feel like you have to guide people along, and, critique is part of that. And there's also critique is just about making our ideas better. And then it's also about pointing out, look, these ideas are not leftist. They don't belong in that tradition. And this is where the historical anchor is so important. If you go back to like left and right after the French Revolution, it's about pushing the revolution further, right? And for Marx, it's pushing it beyond what capitalism can give. And in fact, he became very, very disillusioned with liberalism when he saw that it was abandoned. No sooner was it avowed that it was abandoned because capitalism couldn't deliver. As soon as capitalism couldn't deliver, everybody let go of their high-minded ideals. And Marx held on. Marx demanded progress even beyond capitalism, not just him, So I think it's important to have that. And it's important to kind of know and to situate yourself within a particular tradition. Otherwise, as I said, you go, oh, if that's what the left is, I guess I'm not the left. And then you think, well, maybe I'm with these people. And I've seen a lot of people do this, obviously, famously, Amy Teresa. I'm not sure how to say her name. I've only ever seen it written down.
I always
whole
say
thing
Amy Therese. Amy Therese, yeah, the post-leftist.
Amy Teresa, yeah. Her whole thing kind of missed me, but I think she's gone that direction where she became so disillusioned with the left that she decided, oh, well, maybe I'm a right winger. Is that what
Did
happened?
she?
Yeah.
Did she? I don't know. I would
don't know
not
if she's
claim. I would
back
not
from that.
say Amy Therese is a right winger because I haven't followed her well enough to say. I know what she likes to do on Twitter is to provoke people, but that's not particularly unique on Twitter. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have an opinion of Amy Therese. My only opinion of Amy Therese is that she is thin-skinned because when she made criticized me on her podcast and I then returned fire on a YouTube video, I got comments like, "Why are you going after poor Amy Therese? Why are you obsessed with her?" Or something like that, And I was like, but that's all I know about Amy Therese.
Oh, I didn't know very much about her at all. I don't know. I think that I liked some of her like sort of healthy critique at the beginning, and then I didn't know very much about her, and then I just saw some tweets that were like something about being right winger, and people were kind of joking like, "Oh, you think you're one of them, but then they don't like you and don't want you because they're crazy." I don't know. Anyways, but I think maybe that's a bad example. But what winds up happening is people think, "Oh, I must be with these people," and you don't realize that if you go too far, and I think I notice this myself that I need to be careful with this. If you go too far in criticizing the so-called left, because there's just so much bullshit out there, and the internet brings it to you, in buckets. There's just never-ending madness to comment on. You can kind of lose your bearings and forget that it sounds like to people that you are criticizing the whole left and that you're not a leftist. And people think, oh, well, if that's the way, if people actually do imbibe that, oh, well, I guess I'm not a leftist, right? I leave that behind, or I say, oh, I'm post-left. And then you think, oh, I must be with these people, but you're not, because they are also, especially not guardians of the liberal values that they initially claimed. And this has become really obvious because the left gave up on a lot of, Enlightenment values like ideas of subjectivity, humanism. All of this is just gone. They gave up on the human subject and particularly the working class as a agent of revolution. Because of all of that, this sort of became bequeathed to the right. So free speech was like a right-wing thing, which is insane.
That's like relatively new. I mean, I saw that happen and kind of like how that developed over, I would say, the last 15 years is how.
No, I know. It happened so fast. Like the right started to like people were like, "Oh, free speech." You hear that? It's like a dog whistle for the right. All right. So they managed to set themselves up as guardians of liberal values, but of course they're not.
It didn't start by the right.
And they freedom.
The right didn't claim free speech first. People online became censorious. The kind of cancel culture emerged.
Yeah.
And then when people would argue for free speech, they were then labeled as right wing, and then the right wing kind of picked it up, and it became a right wing trope.
That's a good clarification of the actual steps that it took.
Yeah, it's like the reason why I want to say this because it's not like the right wing. The conservatives are just opportunists. They don't have to have any consistent project. I'm quoting Chris Catrone here, but I think it's really true. Like they don't have an aim. Particularly, they're just trying to. They are consciously trying to preserve the system as it is, and that means protecting power, the centers of power, and whereas the left they have this aim for a certain kind of change. Let's call it capitalism with a human face. Is what the the so-called left, the progressives are doing. Anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, it used to be you scratch below the surface for a little while. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, you scratched below the surface of a conservative and you found a classical liberal. That's the way that it was. And I think what has happened toward the present is that there has been this incredible realignment where what you wouldn't have expected a right winger to stand up for freedom and whatever as long as it's in line with capital, sure, you can have your freedoms. But then as soon as it comes into contradiction with capitalism, they're going to clamp down. Whatever capitalism means, your needs and your desires are secondary to that.
Mm-hmm.
But so now conservatives are, what you would expect of conservatives, which is handy. Now I will say that somebody like Christopher Lash, for instance, decided ultimately that left and right are categories that have little meaning. And it was certainly the case for a long time that really seemed to be true. The more that you heard people talk about the left, I would be like ripping my hair out. Like, no, what? No, just because it sounds nice doesn't mean you're a freaking leftist. Like, left doesn't mean kind and caring, for God's sake. Because then you just open the door for all sorts of really bad shit to be like leftist. And I remember, you remember, we went up for dinner once when you came to London. You had a friend with you who I believe is someone who considered themselves a leftist. And I was joking and I was making this point and I was saying, like, for example, and then I started to reframe extremely xenophobic ideas, but in a really kind sounding language. It was like, you have to think about the communities. The local communities hurt so much from people just leaving. And we need to make sure that we just go into the local communities and really like shore up and empower people so that immigration doesn't, hurt them as much as it's really hurting them now. It's an argument that people have now made, and like the European Union will put money into like going in and getting like soccer stars to go up and be like, hey, Black people, don't come to Europe. And we're like, oh yeah, that's leftist, that's progressive, it's fine. Anyways, I was joking and she was nodding along. And I was like, no, I'm not trying. I accidentally convinced you of xenophobic stuff. What I'm trying to say is like, when you lose your bearings, this is what happens. Like if left and right are just baskets of like kind and mean, then you just reframe whatever is bad shit you want to do anyway.
Oh, I remember. I remember who this was who was with me. It was my friend Mary. Mary is a Portland libertarian. California ideology.
Oscar Wilde said, "Never let the truth get in the way of a good story." So is she like libertarian? She seemed to be kind of a lefty type. She can.
Well, if you come from the Pacific Northwest, it's impossible not to be some sort of kind of left progressive. But no, she's not. She's not a left. She didn't come out of the left. She was coming along with me on this project. She's a friend of mine, a writer, but science fiction writer. But she's not.
She called herself a hippie, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. She's like California ideology, libertarian hippie. I'm not knocking her. Okay. I could knock her, but it's just the point is she really isn't a representative of the left and wouldn't have claimed to be, I don't think. So, but anyway, none of that matters. I'm letting the truth get in the way of a
Okay, I can use another anecdote, but generally people come up with this stuff all the time because it sounds nice. And I mentioned before, like I gave some examples in my compact article where you're like reading it, you're like, ha. And then wait a second, you just said Black people are cognitively impaired and that explains inequality. The fuck? That is so backward. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but anyways, so Christopher Lash kind of said, oh, well, these, this is what's happening. Then left and right not exactly what he thought was happening was this kindliness and meanness, but he was just saying like these categories have no bearing to what they used to, or they have no meaning anymore. So they'll just leave them behind. And he thought that this allowed him to be more free thinking. And to not have to be kind of tied down by, oh, well, what would a leftist say about things? And I am sympathetic to that a little bit, that I think especially online when there's so much pressure to like show your allegiance to a tribe and say all the right things. In fact, somebody criticized me recently. Ashley does this too. Ashley feels that you can see Ashley just tries to say all the right things. I'm like, what? okay, I don't know, maybe sometimes I do feel the pressure to like make sure. For me, I think it's being nuanced. I think like, okay, I need to make sure that what you expect to hear is there, and then we kind of problematize it a little bit. Um, but yeah, but if you start thinking, oh well, what are people going to say about this? What would my tribe say about this? You've put yourself in a box, and I think that's really just um bad. I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, bad research method. I don't know. I see this all the time. You know, when I want to learn about something new, I never take my analysis first in my head, like, oh, this is what I think is going on. And then just search for things. This is why I see this all the time when I get like proposals. It's like, I have an argument that I want to make and I'm just looking for, data to suit the argument. No, I'm often surprised to find that what I think is going on is not really what's going on. So I always try to start with a thorough literature review. No,
Mm.
I try to piece together like, well, what are people saying about this thing? Who is it that's saying it? What are the main claims that are repeated? Not the ones that I think are the most interesting or that I want to launch an argument against, but what are the actual ones that people are repeating? And often you put together a story that's a lot different than the one you originally thought. And I think like a lot of people will, I use this example all the time. I apologize, but it's a good example with the whole happiness issue. Obviously, this is my research. People were like seeing this all in the public sphere and they were like, public sphere, everyone talking about this thing must be because everyone got so unhappy that the powers that be just had to sit up and take notice. My analysis, ready made. Capitalism makes us unhappy. That's it. Woo, I've done a big study. Okay, I think it's important. Yeah, you can make these kinds of arguments. That's part of our discourse. Fine. But I think it is much, much better. I say, well, like, who's making this argument? What data are they using? What's the quality of their data? And then you start finding weird things like, why would like really rich, well-to-do people argue money doesn't make you happy? That's weird. And then you start trying to dig down underneath that. And then you get deeper and deeper. You go back to like these groups. What were they saying in the 60s and 70s? And then you start to realize that there's a whole story that needs to be told before we can even start asking why. So anyway, I think like I am sympathetic to the idea that if all you think about is your allegiance to the left or whatever, and you're afraid of the criticism you're going to get from the left for making an argument, you're lost. And this leads us down just really bad political paths where like the family issue came up and everyone was like, well, what would I say? And something leftist. Oh, here it is. Here's my critique, ready-made from 1848, blam. Not really fully understanding it or contextualizing it or figuring out why.
Or
is this
reading it,
question
or
out?
really even reading it, actually, just sort of remembering that they said
That is
they
there.
wanted to abolish the family or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And then not asking, well, why did this come up now? Why is this relatively powerful? Why do like mainstream policymakers also have similar kinds? Like when I was listening to Sophie Lewis talk, I was like, she's using a lot of arguments I hear from like mainstream policymakers across the political spectrum about how dangerous the family is and so on. And I thought that was weird. And so I went off and I did this deep dive. But the thing is, it takes time. It takes time. And I started started sort of compiling stuff and reading over all of these different arguments and so on. And I noticed too that even my own assumptions was that I've always been really pro childcare. That I think that if you're going to I think equality means that you obviously need to have a real choice, and you don't really have a choice if you can't afford childcare. And I was really shocked to learn that actually there's been an enormous rollback in pretty much every aspect of the welfare state except childcare. And that's weird. And why are the conservatives right now in the UK pushing for more childcare? And the EU has been doing this as well. And the answer is to push people into work, that the prerequisite for having a family now is that both parents work. And to push to make it difficult for families to have a parent that stays home, and to push people into insecure, precarious work that they otherwise wouldn't want to do. And that a lot of these policies, while they have benefited the middle and upper classes of women, they have really hurt the lower classes. There's been widening inequalities. and really caused a lot of problems for families. In fact, there's a really good documentary, or the documentary, like one of these sort of American shows that did this. They followed two families for 20 years, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it was either 10 or 20 years. I can't remember, but you can look it up on YouTube. And it was really sad. Like, to keep their family together, they had to like there's one family, they had to like sacrifice everything just to like push one of the kids into university. Like, well, you could have a better life. And then the other family, like, they had to work shifts where they never saw each other. The mother and the father never saw each other. Like, the mother would work at night and the father would work in the day, or vice versa, over the years. And then they end up getting divorced. And it was really sad. And they wanted to keep their families together, but they couldn't because of this logic of capital. And anyway, so all of this is the context in this, right? That's really difficult to understand. I still haven't got my head around it, and I haven't written anything about it because I'm still trying to find the space to do it, which is why at MCC came along. I was like, yes, because this is what I wanted to figure out, this whole context for a while. But instead, you're just invited to be like, oh, what does my tribe think? Meme, tweet. Instead of thinking like, this thing that is being sold to me is really good, might not actually be good. And it questioned even my own assumptions as well, where now I'm thinking, well, this is like an attack on the working class being dressed up as progressive and as gender equality, which I'm not sure that it is.
So with Christopher Lash, what I remember that he did was he abandoned the notion of progress towards the end of his life. That he was a critic of progress as an idea, and was, when you make that kind of move, it certainly does seem like you are abandoning the left
Yeah.
with that move. And but it's complicated because the kind of progress that he was turning against had to do with, I mean, you're not going to like this so much, but it had to do with the material progress, the idea of raising everyone up to a middle class standard, the idea of increasing industrial capacity, and overcoming barriers through science and technology, in order to create a harmonious society that way. And what it leaves out are everyday notions of progress, is the idea of uh, progress in terms of our social relations. And by that, I don't mean we're going to become we're going to become more moral. We're going to be nicer to each other. We're going to take up, the 10 Commandments and not be xenophobic. But actually, in a more technical way, we're going to understand the basis of our social relations. So we're going to be self-aware. And also we're going to also then be able to alter our social relations together. And that would be the other form of progress that the left wants to hold on to. Overall, I think Lash, and this is just, I've done some studies. I haven't reviewed all the literature. Okay. I don't know.
No,
exactly
right. Which is why I was getting a little bit, yeah, I don't want to go into detail because I've never really been a fan of Lash's later work.
Well, I've read some of Lash's later work, and I do like it. Like, I like Haven in a Heartless World. I like The Revolt of the Elites. I like his posthumously published book on the struggle for women's emancipation. But when I start to try to explain Lash's politics, there are parts of it that I am not getting right. I know, having to do primarily with American socialism and his relationship to that. I mean, but overall, I think what happened was that he came up and had a particular interpretation of the Frankfurt School and of economics through Paul Sweezy. And so, from the perspective of Sweezy and a certain interpretation of the Frankfurt School, the economics contradictions in society were not going to lead to social change. And therefore, everything became played out on the level of policy and elite politics. And there was no mass base for progress anymore. That's probably an overstatement, but there was a way to. So what he wanted to do was champion the ordinary, everyday, democratic foundation of American society and the masses, or everyday Americans. And wanted to hold on to that, but he could only hold on to that in the context of political struggle, which was very, not so narrowly, but fairly narrowly defined by the needs of capital. So he didn't have the understanding of capitalism to see how it was going to be going into crisis again, or see how the contradictions in capitalism itself were shaping the politics. Because Sweezy was like Pollock in many ways, thinking that, oh, well, now we have state capitalism, monopoly capitalism that has overcome those contradictions. And Lash, like many others, basically was working within that framework. So that's how he could abandon progress, because he was abandoning progress within capitalism, as if the society run by elites could make progress simply by continuing the capitalist project more efficiently, rather than just kind of revolutionary progress. So what do you think?
Well, as you describe it, that sounds quite convincing.
Right.
No, and I'm nervous about talking about Lash, because Lash was somebody I read a lot of when I was doing my PhD. So it's been like over 10 years since I've revisited, with the exception of obviously Culture of Narcissism, which I cite and quote quite a lot. So I end up going back to it a lot. But yeah, I'm quite nervous about talking in detail about Lash. But I will say that why I brought up Lash is that I am sympathetic to the idea that being worried about, what your side will say is stifling, and is not conducive to good ideas. But I would not go so far as to abandon left and right as labels, even though I think at different times, I can understand when people made these arguments, there was something to them. But I still think that this kind of historical anchor that's provided by left and right, and that history and what that project was about, is really, really important. And it gives you just a compass, I think, that we haven't solved the problems that gave rise to these old struggles. And so in a way, it's worthwhile to understand those struggles and to carry them on. So for example, just to bring this into something more concrete, like I follow Ken and Malik in thinking that race is not a cause of inequality, but inequality is a cause of race. People are like, what? No, the discourse of race and racial explanations came about because there was a need to, first of all, to justify subjugation of particular people, obviously, but also to justify and make sense of why there were persistent inequalities in a world that supposedly created equality of men. Right? Well, it's like, well, it's because you're not men, there, job done. And like Kenneth Malik describes how even working class people were not considered white. The way that they were talked about was like through like racial language. And you still hear this now, like to a certain extent, where it's like, oh, there's something about these people. Maybe they were like damaged in childhood, or they, you get kind versions and mean versions of it, but it's the same sort of idea that there's something within people that explains the expression of inequality in the world. Irish people famously were not considered white, and they did all sorts of biological, racist, so-called science, measuring skulls and so on, explaining why Irish people actually had pronounced mid-facial prognatism that shows that they are not actually white and they are closer to apes. They have this kind of bullshit. And the reason is because there was a lingering inequality, a need to subjugate, not lingering, a deep inequality, and a need to subjugate people. And the discourse of race came in. And we have not solved that. We still have this this inability to live up to the ideals of bourgeois society. It's an impossibility within capitalism, but we've also never been able to move beyond capitalism. And so we're living in this kind of abyss, this in between. I'm trying not to say interregnum. This like liminal state, maybe. This in between time where you have all of these monstrous ideas that try to explain why we'll never move beyond this. And I think you can only make sense of that, what's happening now, and the way that people are talked about, the way that humanity is demoted, by understanding that historical struggle. And it was a struggle of left and right. The left that said, no, we don't have these things. We cannot live up to these ideals. We cannot progress to a future we know is possible because there are structures in society that prevent this. And the right said, no, this is just the way things are. This is the inequalities in society are an expression of inequalities in humanity between individuals, between groups, and so on. You had the leftish version of that. So if you're thinking about the right, you've got like the lefty kind of version, which is like about cultural differences and so on, should be celebrated and all of that. And then you have it gradually gets scientized on the far right of biological discourses of race. This difference gets biologized. And I think, these kinds of struggles can only be sense of through the anchors of left and right.
Yeah, I agree. We've been talking for about 50 minutes or so, and I want to create a Patreon version of this for tomorrow. So why don't we end it there, and I will try to edit this, more than normal, which I normally don't at all because it's a stream, right?
I know. I'm sorry for the extra work I've put on you.
No, I don't mind that at all. I have this new software that I am experimenting with. Anyway, I'm going to stop recording right here. All right. So in about 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to be starting a second stream for patrons, and we can continue to talk. This was a lively chat during this pre-recorded session. I think that perhaps the fact that most of the comments were flashed on the screen, just wanted to give myself something to do as I watched, might have contributed to that. Thanks to everybody for watching, and come to the Patreon stream. It's shorter than this one, but it will give you all an opportunity to ask me some questions, see how well I do under the pressure of the moment to come up with anything like a coherent answer to anything. And I want to say to Actual Spaghetti, I love you too, Actual Spaghetti. And yeah, I'm gonna end the stream here unless anybody has one more question or anything to say before I do. Let's see. Someone says the more you post us on screen, the longer we stay. So yeah, this is a YouTube trick. Put the comments on the screen. All right. I'm going to say goodbye for now, but I'll put a link to the Patreon in the description for this video and in the comments for this video. And thanks again, everybody, for watching.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants